Hello, everybody. Welcome to KinCounts, a closer look at kinship care and the need for legislative support. We are going to get started here, and I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Ryan Johnson. I'm the chair of the New York State Kin Care Coalition. The coalition has been around since 2004. We are the voice of kinship caregivers in New York State. I'm also the associate director of the New York State Kinship Navigator. So you'll hear a little bit more about the Kinship Navigator from our director, Ray Glaser, who's here with us today. I'm going to briefly go over what our day looks like, including what to expect from the day. Also, please excuse me, little stuffed up. So if you hear some sniffles, that's why, not because I'm sad. All right, so First order of business, we have with us today Assemblyman Andrew Hevesi, who's the chair of Children and Families, and we'll be turning it over to him in just a moment here for some opening remarks. After his opening remarks, Director of the Kinship Navigator, Ray Glaser, is going to be discussing, the Kinship Navigator and also the importance of Kinship Care Month, which is September in New York State. So you'll hear a little bit more about that from her. Then we're going to go over the policy agenda. So you'll hear from a number of different caregivers, as well as from a number of different professionals in the field and another legislator during the course of our policy agenda overview to get a deeper understanding of what the kinship agenda is this year, including our budget ask. And then we'll be doing some closing remarks. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Assemblyman Hevesi. I do want to make sure that I've promoted him correctly first before I get to all that. So let me make sure. Okay, beautiful. Assemblyman Hevesi has served the residents of the 28th District in New York State, in the New York State Assembly since 2005. He's a lifelong resident of the area, and he represents the constituents of Forest Hills, Rego Park, Ridgewood, Richmond Hill, Middle Village, Glendale, and Kew Gardens. In addition to his work locally, Assemblyman Hevesi was appointed to the chair of the Assembly Standing Committee on Children and Families in January 2021, having previously served as the chairman of the Assembly Social Services Committee from 2015 to 2020. As Children and Families Chair, Assemblyman Hevesi has made it a top priority to address and mitigate childhood trauma. He's also been a recipient of the Cura Kinship Champion Award, is a friend to kinship care, has sponsored a number of bills, helped with our budget ask for a number of years. So without further ado, Assemblyman Hevesi, we'd love to hear from you.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. Can you hear from me? Everybody got me? Thumbs up? Okay. Hi to Ray and to Ryan, and thank you guys so much for allowing me to stop in here today. I do apologize. After I give you a brief remarks, I'm going to jump off. This is an insane time in Albany, but there's good stuff related to kinship, and there's I don't think I'm overspeaking when I say that there's a recognition among many legislators that kinship is the answer to many of our problems if it's done well and if it's supported in the way we need to. So we are pushing aggressively for this budget to not only put more money into the Kinship Navigator, but also to the KinGap program. I know both are important. I will tell you that the Children and Families Reinvestment Act, which encompasses some of the kinship asks, has a sizable amount of support going forward. So we're in a good spot there. I would also like to report that we just this morning at 9:30 moved Assembly Bill 2581, Ryan, that's the right to counsel for kinship caregivers to be added to, I want to make sure I have this right, the list of indigent persons that are eligible under counsel under the Family Court Act. So that has been moved out of the Children and Families Committee, and it's my understanding that the senator is going to be looking at that as well. But I just want to leave you with this. We're going to do everything we can to push this year to provide funds to the caregivers and the people who assist the caregivers doing the work that everyone in society needs you to do. We all need you to do well. Everyone needs you to succeed. Not everybody recognizes that, but we do in the legislature. So we're going to do what we can from a policy perspective and also a financial perspective to treat you the way you need to be treated. And I will twist to say science demands that we provide a caring, stable adult for these kids, and we're going to do it. And that includes all of our kin caregivers and everybody in this space. So thank you for all of your assistance. We should have a good budget. We're going to keep fighting. But even, post-budget, we have a lot of policy work, and next year's budget, this is a long haul for us, but we got a good amount of work and a great coalition. So I'm excited to do it with you. Thank you for allowing me to be here today, Ryan and Ray and everybody else. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Assemblyman Hevesi. We really appreciate your support, and good luck today in this crazy time of budget season. Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
You too. Next, let me introduce Ray Glaser. Ray is the director of the New York State Kinship Navigator. She's been with the Kinship Navigator since almost since its inception. Pretty much the second longest kinship person here in the room, probably. So she's also the co-chair of the Kin Care Coalition, does a lot for kinship families and a lot for kinship care. We really appreciate her leadership, and I'll pass it over to her. Ray, to you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate it. I am here today as the director of the Kinship Navigator program, as Ryan said, also the co-chair of the Kin Care Coalition. I'm here to give a brief overview of what kinship care is, why it's so important, what we have going for the kinship system of care in New York, what the Navigator does, and to talk a little bit about Kinship Care Month. Most of this, everybody on the phone call already knows, but it's a good intro to why we're here today. So kinship care, in case you're not familiar, refers to grandparents, other relatives, family, friends that step in to care for kids full-time when the biological parents cannot do so or are unable to, unwilling. In New York, there's roughly about 195,000 children being raised by kin. It's fluid. We believe that's a little bit underreported because kin take these children for anywhere from a couple of months to 18 years. And the important thing to note is of those roughly 200,000 kids in kinship care, less than 7,300 of them are in kinship foster care, which means that many of these kinship caregivers are what we would call informal kinship caregivers, which means they're caring for children outside the formal child welfare system. Many of them are custodians, guardians, or they have no formal legal designation whatsoever. The reason that we note that is because kids commonly come into care with kin for the same reasons why they would come into foster care, but most of them don't receive the same support. So we see a lot of kids coming into care with different trauma, not fantastic home living arrangements. Kin step into care for them, and they might not receive all of the support that they need, which is why we're here today. So part of those supports that are offered to kin in New York State are what we commonly call the kinship system of care. That's comprised of the New York State Kinship Navigator, which is the program that I'm the director of. We provide information, support, referral, and advocacy for kinship caregivers, prospective kin, professionals all across New York State. We service all kinds of kinship caregivers. Doesn't matter if they are prospective, informal, formal, anything. We are able to support those with the information, referral, and education. We have our local kinship programs. There are 14 programs currently serving 25 counties in New York State. They are able to provide what we call boots on the ground support for caregivers. They have support groups. They work with caregivers on parenting skills, offer respite, legal information, case management, basically anything that a caregiver would need when they come into care of children. And they serve as legal custodians or caregivers without a formal court order, which are most of our caregivers. We also have permanency resource centers. There is currently a permanency resource center in every county in the state. They are able to provide most of the same supports the local kinship programs would do, but they do so for parents that are post-guardianship or post-adoptive families. There aren't as many of those across the state, but we do have more supports that are available in more counties for the permanency resource centers. And then there's other small programs. They might be county TANF funded. They might be running through the Office of the Aging. They might be privately funded programs that exist across the state in a limited capacity. And you'll see in front of you, we have a map of those 14 local kinship programs. You'll notice most of them are servicing caregivers in the more populated areas. You've got Rochester, Buffalo, Albany, New York City, a lot of those areas are covered. And then the white space are where there is not a formal OCFS funded kinship program that can serve a family. So the New York State Kinship Navigator, just to give a brief overview, like I said prior, we are information, referral, and support. We have a warm line where we assist kinship caregivers Monday through Friday, 10 to 4. You can call and speak to a kinship navigator. We'll give you information on common caregiving issues such as access to financial assistance, what your legal options are, enrolling children into school, accessing official documents, other such things that caregivers find very important when bringing a child into their care. We do have a website as well that you can access us via online chat or via email. And on our website, we have a clickable map of New York State where you can select your county and what type of resource you're looking for to see what's available to you in that county. We have legal fact sheets on everything I just mentioned about common caregiving issues. But then along with that, there's cited legal fact sheets. So if you're running into trouble at family court, you're running into trouble getting a financial assistance grant, they're cited, they're backed by OTDA so that you've got the information that you need, either as a professional to advocate for your clients or as a kinship caregiver. We also have instructions, informational videos on common things like what are my legal options as a caregiver? How do I fill out that financial assistance grant? We're there to help you in any way, shape, or form. We also have something we call virtual case management. So if you could slide back to that previous slide right there, Ryan, we've got that map of New York State, and you see in the white space, there's not a formal kinship program that services families there, but the New York State Kinship Navigator has stepped in 14 of those counties, soon to be 20, where we have something called virtual case management, where if you call into our helpline, we have a virtual case manager that can do almost everything that an on-site case manager would do with you just over the phone or email or text. So we can help you apply for benefits. We can help you if you're struggling in family court. We can link you to resources for food, clothing. We offer virtual support groups, and that case manager will walk through the whole process with you for up to 6 months at a time. We also provide education. As you noticed, Ryan and I, we lead the Kinship Navigator. We also lead the KinCare Coalition. So across the state, we encourage those local kinship programs and other kinship providers to join us in the coalition to advocate for kinship caregivers across the state. We do kinship presentations also across the state, have been in person. Now they're a little bit more virtual, but we're able to educate local departments of social services, human service agencies, and anybody that's requesting information on kinship care. And we also, like I said, we have legislative education, and we have our online video archive. So our whole goal is to really appeal to kinship caregivers and anybody working in kinship care to make sure that all that information is there at your fingertips and that we're able to connect you to those supportive services. And another thing that we've highlighted is Kinship Care Month. This is the piece of our policy agenda that I'm slated to speak on, very near and dear to my heart. Kinship Care Month, as Ryan mentioned, is celebrated in September in New York State, and it's meant to celebrate the fantastic work that kinship caregivers do. It was first declared back in 2014. And since then, it's been passed through resolutions and proclamations commemorating Kinship Care Month is September. We're asking for the same thing to happen again this year as part of our policy agenda. As Kinship Care Month, we spend a lot of time at the Navigator and all the local kinship programs across the state celebrating our caregivers. The Navigator hosts an annual luncheon. It's been virtual for the last 2 years. We're hopeful in 2022, we're able to bring it back. You'll see a photo there of us in 2019, all coming together, celebrating caregivers, celebrating the people that work with them, and celebrating our champions in the legislature that help make kinship care more forward moving and provide those supports that are needed for families. that's my piece. I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan so that we can move forward with our policy agenda today. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Ray. So for the next 40 minutes or so, we are going to be talking about the 2022 Kinship policy agenda. If you have questions about what our policy asks are, feel free to throw those in the chat. We will be following up with folks who have questions after today's webinar. A recording of today's webinar will also be available for anybody who wants to view or share. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is the kinship budget ask. And so as Assemblymember Hevesi mentioned, kinship services are funded through the legislative process. The governor puts in some dollars for both the system of care that Ray mentioned earlier, both the Kinship Navigator as well as the local programs. This year, our kinship budget ask is for quite a large increase. Fund kinship services at $10 million. We really believe that if kinship services are funded robustly, we are able to help keep children out of the foster care system, which children on average cost $67,000 per child per year to be in foster care, costs less than $5,000 a year to serve a child through the kinship service system of care. So we say if you fund the kinship service system, you're saving a lot of money by children not needing to go into foster care. Our second kinship budget ask is to stabilize kinship services by enacting the Unified Kinship System of Care Bill language, which would incorporate all of the current 14 local kinship care programs under one umbrella, ensuring that kinship services are funded from year to year. We have had pretty unstable funding over the last few years. You can see here the history of kinship funding in New York dating back to 2006 has been all over the place. Our next speaker, who operates one of the local programs down in the Binghamton area, is going to talk a little bit more about her experience with the history of kinship funding. She's been around since the beginning. At the very least, what needs to happen for kinship budget asks are to restore $1.9 million to fully fund the local program. So the governor has only put in $338,000 for local programs. So there needs to be a legislative addition of at least $1.9 million. Same thing goes for the Kinship Navigator line item. There's, the governor has only put in $220,000. So continue adding $100,000 to the Kinship Navigator to ensure that we're fully funded as well. Again, our robust ask, are what we believe would be best for the kinship community would be a $10 million unified system of care. I'm going to be introducing Miss Deb Faulks, who works for the Family Enrichment Network. She's going to give a little bit of her experience and background as a program director of a program down in the Binghamton area and how the funding has impacted her program. Miss Deb, I'm going to turn it over to you. Oh, you're on mute. If you could unmute yourself, that would be excellent.
One of the few times people can't hear me. Sorry about that. Thank you for allowing me to talk. And I apologize to everyone that I have to gallop through because I'm on a very tight leash here. Otherwise, they know I'll meander and take up all the time. I'm Deb Faulks. I'm the Family Support Services Director at the Family Enrichment Network. And I've supervised our kinship care program for the past 16 years in Broome and sometimes Tioga counties. Over those 16 years, we've served 2,400 new unduplicated families, which is an average of 150 families a year. Although every year we work with more than 150 families because some of our old families that have previously enrolled come back because they need services, as kinship care is complicated and ever changing. Some of the services we provide: a brief overview, understanding and a safe haven for stressed, overwhelmed kinship caregivers, assistance with the complicated application forms for the non-parent caregiver or the child-only grant, hand-holding and comfort in stressful family court appearances, advocacy, enrolling kinship children in different school districts. This can be challenging as not every school is aware of the kinship care laws. Referrals and connections for needed resources. We host family fun events so kinship children know they're not the only ones who are being raised by people other than their parents. And when funding allows, we have provided free counseling. Our program has suffered from uneven funding over the past 16 years. We were one of the original kinship care programs funded in November of 2005, and our funds have ranged per year from $140,000 down to $40,000 a year. This October, we face no funding and we have no funding streams apparent in this COVID era, and our program's likely to close. So what has unstable funding meant to our program? It's meant a number of things. We've had reduced services in Tioga County. Kinship families in this rural county respond best when our program has a physical presence, an office with staff. When funding is limited, services are consolidated in Broome County because Tioga County has only a quarter of the population. Our Kinship program has built bridges and networks in Tioga County, but these are more difficult to maintain with reduced staff positions and from a distance. Our changing funding streams has meant a loss of staff positions. We used to have a full-time child and youth advocate who provided services and groups for Kinship youth. Every child comes into Kinship care with some level of toxic stress or trauma and suffering grief and loss. Different parenting skills are needed to help Kinship children as they struggle to find a new place in their new Kinship family and understand what has happened to them. Kinship caregivers need support and guidance for helping their Kinship children and dealing with their own changing roles. Our program started with a full-time counselor for Kinship families in 2006 to help families address these concerns, but that position has dwindled over the years and finally disappeared fully 2 years ago. Our funding instability has led to unnecessary staffing changes. Some of our staff have felt compelled to leave positions they love and do very well because of the uncertainty of their job security. Our staff have bills to pay, student loans to manage, mouths to feed, and they need stable employment that they can rely on without worrying that their position will disappear. This loss of staff has also meant loss of specialized skills for our Kinship program. Kinship family situations can be messy, complicated, ever-changing, as said before, and our staff need training in many areas, such as the width of the available community services and who to connect with, the workings of the family court, an understanding of the Kinship care guidelines and the changing Kinship care laws, and the process and procedures of local departments of social services. Our two counties, Broome and Tioga, have different procedures for completing the MPC child-only applications. Certain questions are answered differently. That's special information that we need to know about. My experience managing our program has shown that new staff need 1 year to get up to speed and 2 years to have a firm grasp of all the complexities inherent in their position. They need time to build those interpersonal connections with other agency staff and DSS caseworkers that allow for the smooth transition of services, advocacy, and resolutions to their problems. Funding instability has created for us a suppression of wages. As grants are competitive and the awards are not huge, and the lower funded grants have led to no wage increases as we've struggled to maintain services for our Kinship families. Programs have been expected to do more with less. Grants are flat funded, and this has made it very difficult to keep abreast of the increasing minimum wage. And most importantly, funding instability has led to a loss of services for Kinship caregivers who function inside a hidden foster care system without the benefits and payments afforded to regular foster care providers. Kinship caregivers face many challenges as they strive to navigate complicated systems of services to seek support for their Kinship children. Without Kinship care programs and well-trained staff, these challenges can be overwhelming and Kinship families miss out on the resources they need to help keep them afloat and stable. Kinship care programs need reliable, consistent funding and to be finally recognized as a vital service for all our New York Kinship care families. Thank you, and I went 30 seconds over. Back to you, Ryan.
You did great, Miss Deb. Thank you so much for talking a little bit about how Kinship funding has impacted your program and your community. We really appreciate you being here with us today. Okay, we are going to move on to our next topic. We do have a packed agenda today. So our next topic, Assemblymember Hevesi actually just mentioned before he had to leave, which this is really exciting news for us. So we have a bill, as he mentioned, 2581, and in the Senate it's 6074, that would allow for caregivers who cannot afford an attorney to be assigned an attorney by the court system when they're a part of a court proceeding. And so, you know, this is something that we've been working on as a coalition for a long time. Caregivers need representation when they're, when we're talking about going to family court, whether that's a custody petition, guardianship petition, or in the next story you're about to hear, being, asked to be a placement for children who, whether that's a part of a mediation between the county and the family, having access to an attorney helps smooth out both the court process and ensures that the kinship voice is heard, as part of protecting children and providing safe and stable homes for children. So it was really great news to hear that the Assembly has moved on this bill. This bill actually did pass the Senate last year, but got caught up in the Assembly. So that's really big news for us here. I'm going to be introducing Miss Susan Sweeney, who's with us today, who's graciously offered to come tell a little bit about her story. She's from Cortland County, and well, I guess she's probably from Onondaga County and was dealing with a Cortland County case. And her story is very compelling about the need that kinship caregivers have for assigned counsel. So Susan, if you would go ahead and unmute yourself, we'd love to hear from you today. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for allowing me to share my grandson's story as it happens thus far. In September 2019, my three grandsons, then 18 months, 2 and 3, were taken from their mother and father. The next day, I contacted Cortland County, where I had adopted their mother through. The person who answered the phone immediately said, "Oh, I remember you, Susan. We remember when you adopted Tasha." But yet I was not considered, even though I was a former foster parent and an adoptive parent for Cortland County, I was not considered an appropriate placement for my grandsons. Excuse me, I am COVID recovering. So
That is okay. Take your time. You're okay. Yep. I'm going to put you on mute for just a second, Susan. Okay. Susan came to the Kinship Navigator a few years ago. As she mentioned, she was asked to take her grandchildren from Cortland County. She had over a year's worth of pursuing Cortland County, who had placed the children in foster care with someone that the children didn't know. And Susan had tried for over a year to get those children through an Article 6 custody petition, to get the children into her care as the children's grandmother, and was unsuccessful in obtaining custody during that entire year, between delayed hearings and between just being told that, oh, the county has custody, why don't you go work with the county? The county had given her a hard time. So Susan, if when you give me a thumbs up, I'll turn it back over to you to keep telling your story. So her three grandsons spent over a year in foster care with strangers while she attempted to get them back into her care. I'm going to have you unmute yourself there, Susan.
again, my apologies.
That is okay.
As Ryan stated, for a year, the DSS lawyer, each time we went into court, would claim that I had not filed the right paperwork, that instead of this, I should have filed that. And I then had to wait for the next court hearing to file yet another paper. After 53 weeks, my oldest grandson was kicked out of preschool daycare, and the foster mother quit on my three grandsons. And so they were suddenly torn from a home that they had been in for 53 weeks and put into my home. And I had to explain to them why Becky, their foster mother, no longer loved them, because that's the terms that a then 2, 3, and 4-year-old could understand. And there is no understanding as to why they had to go through that year of attachment and then being taken. Legal counsel in that year could have circumvented that loss for my grandsons. I'm not crying, it's just my voice, I apologize. Various caseworkers, as they came into my home each month, told me that they were going to terminate parental rights for the boys' parents. I continually said that I wanted to pursue the kin gap method of support for the boys, and I was told that DSS in Cortland County did not do kin gap, that I needed to do an adoption. I told them that I would be willing if that was the only way to do it. In May of 2021, actually, I'm sorry, in February 2021, we went to court again, and the DSS worker who said that he was going to ask the parental rights be terminated, instead, in a court document, said return to parent. And when the DSS lawyer asked for termination of rights, the judge said these two things don't add up, the report versus your ask. We were then sent to mediation, and the parents were each asked if it would surrender their rights, and each parent said no, emphatically no. And then the lawyers for the two parents then turned to me and said that I needed to do an Article 6. And each time I gave valid reasons why I should not do an Article 6, such as I can't monitor the parole officer, the drug and alcohol use, and all of this that they were in counseling for and legal proceedings, etc. The lawyers kept giving me reasons why or ways around, and basically that mediation ended with everybody understanding that I was going to file an Article 6. I never wanted to file an Article 6 because an Article 6 means the parental rights are not terminated. I would be co-parenting with those two parents, and I would be fully responsible legally and financially for those three boys who are very high need children. When I made it known that I was not going to file an Article 6 and again wanted to pursue either the kin gap or the adoption, which would require DSS to terminate parental rights, DSS contacted the father's mother, who has a DSS child protective history, but it was no longer an issue because those children were all grown. They filed an Article 6 with her, and I was only told of it afterwards. I then tried to appeal that decision, and that appeal took place after the boys were moved in August of 2021. My grandsons would have benefited from legal counsel in the beginning if I had had legal counsel to cut through all the red tape that the DSS and the courts were putting up for a year, that all of a sudden disappeared when they no longer had a foster parent. There were no more red tape after 53 weeks of placement with this home. My grandsons have attachment disorders, if you can imagine, and they have now been torn after 11 months in my home. They were torn from my home to the other grandma's home. So instability is the result of a lack of legal counsel that I never had access to. So that is my summation as to why I think an assigned counsel would have benefited my three grandsons and helped them have stability in their lives.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Susan. Susan attempted to get an attorney throughout this, but due to finances, wasn't able to afford one. And so, part of this issue of assigned counsel is when folks can't afford an attorney, they need to have access to one. So thank you again, Susan, for all that you've done for your grandsons, for your family, and thank you for sharing your story here with us today. We really appreciate you being here and helping illustrate the need for assigned counsel for kinship caregivers. The next topic that we will be covering today is public benefits. So we actually have two bills that have to do with public benefits. And so the first bill is to prohibit child support collection enforcement when good cause exemptions are claimed and proven by kinship caregivers who are seeking the non-parent or child-only grant. So right now, if a kinship caregiver goes to the department and says, I'd like to apply for the non-parent grant, there is a child support enforcement mechanism that, the department goes after the parents for child support. Well, that can cause a lot of problems for families. And so, you're able to claim something called good cause. There's already rules around how to claim good cause, but if there's fear of retribution, if there's fear for the safety of the child, you can elect to not provide information about the parents so that they can't go and pursue child support. Well, as you'll hear from our next speaker, some counties do that anyways, despite good cause being claimed and proven. Counties have the ability in New York State to still go ahead and pursue child support against the parents, just without the cooperation of the caregiver. This is also true of parents who apply for public assistance and are concerned about domestic violence or things like that. And so we'd like to scrap that. You should not be able to collect child support when good cause has been shown. The second bill has to do with children essentially being able to get their own separate grant. So one of the biggest differences between the level of support in foster care versus the level of support in non-foster kinship care has to do with the amount of money a child has access to. So in foster care, each child gets their own foster care subsidy, but with public assistance, children are prorated depending on how many children are in the home. So if you have one child, you're looking at an average of $430. But if you add a second child to that home, that second child's only getting an additional $150, not a full grant of $430. So we'd like each child to have access to their own grant. It would bring kinship caregivers who are outside of the foster care system to a similar level of support. It's still not the same level of support as foster care, but to a raised level of support. So our next speaker is Danielle Kielar, who is from Catholic Charities of Western New York. Her program helps kinship caregivers apply for benefits, and she's going to talk a little bit about what those benefits mean to kinship families and what some of the hurdles are that kinship families face when applying to those benefits, and how these two bills ultimately can help reform that. So Danielle, if you would unmute yourself, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Danielle Kielar. I'm the Kinship Caregiver Social Worker for Catholic Charities of Buffalo. I run the Kinship Caregiver Program in Allegheny County and oversee the program in Cattaraugus. I've been working with families now for over 12 years and have been helping families with the TANF Child Only Public Assistance Grant, like helping them apply for these grants to help with their financial needs that they may have. I help the families apply for the Child Only grant. I take them, we go through the form, fill it out, line by line, like as if the child was filling it out. And I also go to the intake appointments with the caregivers, and I'm an advocate for these caregivers when they have questions that may arise, especially about the child support part of it. This TANF grant can help with rent, utilities, children's expenses. Kids are expensive, it'll help with things like, school supplies and food and things like that. But then it also helps these families with financial stability. Caregivers that I've worked with have been so thankful for this extra money to help raise these relative children and eases their stress levels. But in some instances, families do not want to take the biological parents to court for child support, and it can prove a good cause for exemption for applying for child support. They are worried about them threatening to get custody back of the child, even if it's not in the best interest of the child, and it can be detrimental to the child and their stability. If there is a good cause exemption given within the family, they still can get the TANF. Just with my experiences, they've gotten 25% less of the total amount of the grant, and they can still use that for all the daily living expenses, but they don't have to take the biological parents to court for child support. They can receive also the $400 stipend that's in the TANF grant to go towards camps in the summer, which helps with respite for the caregivers. Right now, like Ryan was saying, if good cause exemption has been established with the local DSS, they still can pursue child support without the caregiver's cooperation. This can cause undue stress on the caregiver, worrying that the biological parents will threaten them constantly to take them back to court and get the child back, even though, like I said, it's not in the best interest of the child. And we want to keep stability within the child and their family. And these families end up closing these TANF cases and are struggling to make ends meet with raising these relative children, because they're only, the only income they have is their own, which is like, their retirement, or their, if they have SSI or SSD, there's not a lot of money coming into the families. In other states, they have prohibitive counties to pursue the child support once the good cause is proven. And this would ensure that kinship families know that they are safe and can apply without fear of retaliation to the parents. Some of my families, I had them go through and like just give me some comments. And, one is like, I'm not going to open, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to open a can of worms, and, have them constantly make threats that they're going to take the child to court, the child to, or me back to court for custody of the child. And then in some instances, they say, thank you for doing that, doing that good cause, and letting me get this TANF benefit, because it's helping, she didn't want to take the bio parent to court because she's trying to get her back on her feet and hopefully get the child back in her care. And if she was, if the mom was ridden with that extra expense, then she probably wouldn't been able to get, up on her feet and get her mental health under control and get the child back eventually. And then it's also helped with different things with the child support or the child care and respite in that. And then the second bill, the second law that the coalition is working towards is having each child in the kinship family receive their own child-only case, not base it on the amount, or base the amount on how many other kids are in the home. So each child would get $350. That's what typically our counties have around, but Ryan was saying like about $430, instead of, lowering that amount for each caregiver or each child in the home. Each child would benefit from the full amount of the grant and help ease the stress on the caregivers for multiple children. Instead of getting like they have, 3 or 4 siblings, they should get, the full amount for each sibling, not, less and less for each child that they get, just to help them, with everyday living expenses.
Danielle, thank you so much for, telling us your experience. Especially serving rural counties, it's important for families who may have limited access to resources to be able to take full advantage of the public benefits available to kinship families. So thank you so much for coming to today's event and talking about your experience in helping families. Really appreciate it. The next thing we'll be talking about is an issue called hidden foster care. Oftentimes called a safety plan or an alternative living arrangement. This is when the Child Protective Service goes into the home of a parent and instead of doing a formal removal proceeding, instead asks a relative to take the child informally. So with no court order, no custody, no foster care placement. And, this can cause a lot of issues for the family, including being able to make medical and educational decisions on behalf of the child and applying for benefits. Our next speakers today are Kate and Dave Kruk, who have been very generous with telling their story in the past, and we really appreciate them being with us again today. But I'll save some time here by turning it straight over to them to let them tell you how being in a safety plan both impacted their family and the boys that they've been asked to raise informally. So Kate and Dave, I'll ask you to unmute and go ahead and tell us your story. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Ryan, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Yep. My name is Dave Kruk, and I'm here, as Ryan said, with my wife, Kate. We're from Rotterdam, New York, and Schenectady County. My sister, Casey, is 43 years old, and she struggled with bipolar disorder and drug addiction for many years. Her 3 sons are now ages 19, 17, and 13. Their dad has been in prison for most of their lives. 2 of the boys are on the autism spectrum.
Since 2009, Dave and I have opened our home and our hearts to our nephews dozens of times. In 5 instances over a decade, Schenectady County Children and Family Services has been involved. We were even certified as foster parents. Our nephews came to be in our care whenever Casey was in a mental health crisis or a drug addiction relapse. Sometimes Child Protective Services brought them and asked us to let them stay. Most recently, they were driven to our home by their mother, who was in a manic state and under the influence of methamphetamine. In each of these cases, our home and support were part of an informal arrangement with CPS, known as a safety plan.
Kate and I have been involved in more safety plans than we can count because OCFS doesn't have to tell you when they start or end. When the police left our home and an ambulance took my sister to a psychiatric ward, to the best of our knowledge, we were part of a safety plan, but we can't know for sure because a safety plan can be started at any time if CPS determines it is needed with no documentation. And it can be terminated at any time if OCFS determines the home environment of the biological parent is, in their own words, safe enough.
True story. You can be a caregiver in a safety plan at any time and have no idea. OCFS has no responsibility to inform anyone that they're in a safety plan, and at no point in the past 12 years did a social worker communicate to us or the children's biological parents their rights or the implications of the safety plan that placed their children in our home. This is shadow foster care, plain and simple.
Each time the children were returned to us, a new caseworker with no understanding or even review of the previous safety plans would start a new one, asking if it was okay for the kids to stay with us for a while. There were never clear benchmarks for return to their parent, and little if any help was given to aid my sister in her long-term mental health and drug addiction recovery. We found that when a family is in crisis like ours was over and over, CPS first seeks to place the children with relatives. What they don't tell you is that once they find an adequate relative caregiver, they don't provide any support for them. We were essentially treated as unpaid babysitters, expected to transport the kids to school, handle all their daily routines and activities, and lapse medical care. This is especially challenging because a caregiver family has no legal rights to bring children to a medical provider.
This is the reality of hidden foster care. For example, one late night in 2017, Casey was admitted to the non-elopement psychiatric ward of Ellis Hospital with no contact with the outside world for several weeks. Her children came to stay with us. Her youngest son, who is autistic, had none of his medication for his multiple disabilities. He had not been attending school for months since his condition had escalated beyond what his teachers could handle. The oldest 2 boys had nothing but the clothes they were wearing. Exhausted, we reached out to CPS for help the first thing the next morning. We were told that they had no record of any of the children's medical history, even though we turned those records over to CPS the previous time they were in our care. They advised us that we should file for custody and that it was our responsibility to reach out to doctors and the school, but provided us no supporting documentation and no legal support. We were on our own.
Kate and I undertook every expense associated with raising 3 additional children. We took leaves of absence from work, and we sacrificed our own family goals to make sure our nephews were cared for as part of the shadow foster care system.
The reason we overshare with you today is because for a long time, we, like many kinship caregivers, didn't talk about this to anybody. We made excuses it works. We maxed out our credit cards. We cried after we put the kids to bed, trying to figure out how in the world we could possibly make all of this work.
Our family would double overnight, and we would have to maintain the normal our own son was used to, plus navigate neglected doctor, dentist, mental health visits, and translate lapsed disability services. And we hope that if we start sharing now, other families might get the help they need sooner to arrive at the best possible outcomes for all the children they love. Every time anyone is involved in a safety plan, they should be notified of their rights, responsibilities, and expectations, and be immediately referred to the Kinship Navigator program. The overall goal should always be the long-term success of the children. This will in most cases be through reunification with biological parents and kinship caregivers have a valuable role to play in that as well.
Most importantly, safety plans must be short-term in duration and include a record of events with clear benchmarks for return to the biological parent. All parties involved in a safety plan must receive a written copy, which includes a date for return or for the formal removal process to begin. The uncertainty and anxiety of living in custodial arrangements through OCFS, established safety plans, and through shadow foster care have caused over a decade of trauma for our nephews, our son, and for us. These informal arrangements meant no agency was responsible to ensure the best possible outcomes for the children or their mother, and certainly not for our own kinship family. We hope that by speaking now, we will bring to light the dire need to either do away with or have oversight and consistent rules governing the use of safety plans statewide. Thank you for inviting us today, Ryan, for the Kinship Navigator. We appreciate your time.
Thank you both so much for being willing and come to tell your story and for your advocacy on behalf of other kinship caregivers who have experienced or will be experiencing similar things to your family. So thank you again for all that you've done for your nephews and for all that you've done for the kinship community. Thanks so much, guys. Our next topic today, we will be discussing housing reforms. We are asking for the expansion of the definition of a special needs population within the New York State Division of Home and Community Renewal to include kinship caregivers. What that essentially means is when you've expanded the definition of special needs populations, developers who use tax-exempt bonds or low-income housing tax credits to build new buildings will, those things can be used on behalf of kinship caregivers. Those development dollars can be used on behalf of kinship caregivers, and to secure kinship housing as a state housing priority. So current priorities are community renewal and revitalization projects, integrative supportive housing projects, which are projects that provide supportive housing to one or more special needs populations showing evidence of a service and operating subsidy from a governmental agency, such as the Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative. With us today to talk more about this issue, we have Nancy Barr, who's the vice chairwoman of the Westchester County Legislature from District 6. She is in her third two-year term as county legislator representing District 6, comprised of Port Chester, Rye Brook, and Harrison, and was privileged to be elected by her colleagues in January of this year to serve as the vice chair of the board. Vice Chair Barr currently serves on all board committees, is vice chair of the board's Environment, Energy, and Climate Committee, co-chair of the Families Task Force, and the Board of Legislators liaison to the county's Airport Advisory Board. She also serves as the vice president of the Council of Community Services of Rye Town, Port Chester, and Rye Brook, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to bring together local leaders and stakeholders to assess and meet the needs of the community. In this capacity, Vice Chair Barr has worked hard to find solutions to community challenges via advocacy and mobilization. Legislator Barr, thank you for being with us here today. I'll just ask you to unmute yourself and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. So thank you for that introduction and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak today and to listen to the testimony of some of these unbelievable caregivers. I don't have to give you my background. Ryan already did that. I just want to tell you about the Westchester Families Task Force, which is a coalition of legislators, nonprofit leaders, educators, parents, and members of the public working toward identifying and addressing the issues and concerns facing Westchester families. And for the last several years, the task force has been focused on one of the things it's been focused on is the availability of suitable and affordable housing for kinship families, especially grandparents raising their grandchildren. In Westchester alone, there are more than 5,000 grandparents who are the sole caregivers for their children. Approximately half are over 60, nearly 70% are women, and a significant percentage have been raising the children for 5 years or more. Most of these households have low or very low incomes. And as we heard earlier, Westchester is not alone. We heard that statistic that in New York State, there's an estimated 195,000 children being raised by kin, most of whom are not in the foster care system. And while we know there are a number of challenges for older adults raising their grandchildren, housing is certainly one of the most critical. And to begin with, affordable senior units typically do not allow children to be residents. So when a grandparent takes in a grandchild, they may well have to leave their apartment behind. No one should be faced with a decision between taking care of a loved one and homelessness. And even if the children are allowed, a typical senior residence may not have appropriate facilities for children, such as a secure play area. And conversely, a typical family residence may not have safety measures in place for seniors, such as safety bars in the bathroom. Further, the issues older adults may have in keeping up with the needs of their school-age charges may create additional challenges in what is already a very challenging situation. But we know it does not have to be that way. Prior to the pandemic, a group from our task force visited the so-called grandparent apartment houses in the Bronx. This complex, which was built in 2005, has 50 independent apartments for grandparents raising grandchildren or other elders raising young relatives. In addition to providing safe and affordable housing for the seniors, there are on-site services for grandparents and for students, including an active after-school program and 24-hour staff and support. In 1 year alone, the arrangement helped 120 youth stay out of foster care, and 92% of these children progressed to the next grade in school. The Families Task Force, as well as my colleagues here at the county legislature, would like to see this type of supportive and affordable housing available to families in Westchester. And we have sent a letter to our state representatives urging some important changes to New York state law that could benefit kinship households throughout New York State. We respectfully request that the New York legislature name kinship housing as a state housing priority. And in addition, we ask that the category of kinship caregivers be added to the list of special needs populations in New York State's Division of Homes and Community Renewals programs. This would provide incentives to developers because they would be able to seek special financing, such as tax-exempt bonds or low-income housing credits. And in talking with developers, there is interest in building these types of apartments if the appropriate incentives were in place. It is now my pleasure to introduce Mrs. Marcia Spencer, one of Westchester's senior caregivers. Mrs. Spencer is raising her grandson and is active at the Family Service Society of Yonkers as a participant of the Kinship Support Program and as a Grand Power advocate. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Legislator Barr. Unfortunately, Marcia dropped off from the webinar, unfortunately. So I'm not sure if there were some technical difficulties there, but thank you so much for, outlining this great issue so well. This was really helpful to have you here today. And thank you for your advocacy on behalf of the kinship community in Westchester County.
Thank you for your advocacy.
Absolutely. So folks, that wraps up our time here today. If you have questions about our legislative agenda, you can email us at kincarecoalition@gmail.com. We'd be happy to answer your questions. Again, a recording of this video will be available on our website, so please feel free to check it out. Thank you to everybody who came to attend today's webinar, and thank you to all of you who shared your stories today. We really appreciate everything that you've done to help advance the cause of kinship care, and we will be talking with you again in the near future. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.